The storm arrived without warning, swallowing the Dorset cliffs in sheets of rain that turned the narrow road into a river of mud. Lady Adriana Fairfax pressed herself against the carriage seat, watching through rain-blurred glass as the wheels skidded dangerously close to the precipice. Below, the sea crashed against jagged rocks with a violence that matched the thunder overhead. "Steady!" the driver shouted, his voice barely audible over the wind. But there was nothing steady about this journey, nothing steady about the decision that had brought her here, fleeing the only home she'd known with nothing but a leather satchel and her mother's cryptic final letter pressed against her heart. The carriage lurched. Wood splintered with a sound like breaking bones. Adriana's scream caught in her throat as the world tilted sideways. The door tore from its hinges. Her fingers found purchase on the frame for one desperate moment before the carriage pitched over the edge, and she was falling until she wasn't. Her hand caught on something, a root, a rock. She couldn't tell through the rain and terror. She dangled in empty space, the sea roaring its hunger below, her fingers already slipping on wet stone. Then another hand closed around her wrist, strong, unyielding. "Hold on." She looked up into eyes the color of storm clouds, set in a face carved from determination and shadow. A man in a black riding coat, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his jaw set as he braced himself against the cliff's edge. "I can't," she gasped. "You will." He hauled her upward with a strength that seemed impossible, pulling her from death's grasp inch by agonizing inch until she collapsed onto solid ground, gasping and shaking. The man knelt beside her, rain streaming down his face. "Are you injured?" She couldn't speak, could only stare at the stranger who'd appeared from nowhere to save her life. He removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders, then helped her to her feet. Through the storm, she glimpsed his horse tethered nearby, and beyond it, the skeletal remains of her carriage disappearing into the violent sea. "Come," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "My estate is near." "Who are you?" she managed. He paused, and something flickered in those grey eyes, surprise, perhaps, that she didn't know him. "Salvador Ashbourne," he said, "Duke of Ravenshire." Adriana's breath caught for reasons that had nothing to do with her near death. Ravenshire, the name from her mother's letter, the name that had haunted her childhood in whispers and half-told stories. The man whose family her guardians had forbidden her to ever seek. "Lady Adriana Fairfax," she whispered back, watching recognition and something darker flash across his features. The Duke's expression shuttered immediately. His hand fell from her elbow. "Fairfax," he repeated, the name like ash on his tongue. Thunder rolled across the cliffs, but the storm between them felt more dangerous than any weather. "You should not have come here," he said quietly. "I had no choice." "We always have choices, Lady Adriana." He turned toward his horse, then looked back at her, his face grim. "Though I suppose Providence has made this one for us both. Come, the storm worsens, and you'll catch your death standing here." She followed him to his mount, letting him lift her onto the saddle before he swung up behind her. As they rode through the driving rain toward the dark silhouette of Ravenshire Hall rising against the cliffs, Adriana felt the weight of fate settling around her shoulders. She'd come seeking answers about her inheritance. She hadn't expected to find them in the arms of the one man in England her family had sworn was their enemy. 6 hours earlier, the sun had still been shining when Adriana climbed into the hired carriage at the posting inn. The driver, a thin man with nervous hands, had loaded her single trunk with unusual haste, barely meeting her eyes when she'd asked about the route. "Direct to Ravenshire village, m'lady," he'd muttered. "Fastest way is along the cliffs." Now, watching him disappear into the churning sea along with his carriage, Adriana wondered if the choice of route had been his at all. The Duke's horse moved steadily through the storm, its rider silent and tense behind her. She could feel the rigid control in his posture, the deliberate space he maintained between them, despite the intimacy of their position. Every line of his body spoke of a man accustomed to command, yet something in his silence suggested he was as unsettled by her presence as she was by his. Ravenshire Hall emerged from the darkness like a fortress, all grey stone and narrow windows, crouched against the cliffs as if daring the sea to claim it. Light glowed in a few windows, warm against the storm, but there was nothing welcoming about the edifice. It looked exactly like what it was, the stronghold of a family that had weathered centuries of English history and intended to weather centuries more. The Duke dismounted first, then lifted her down with impersonal efficiency. A groom appeared from the stables, eyes widening at the sight of his master's unexpected companion. "Send for Mrs. Hawthorne," the Duke ordered, "and have Dr. Morrison come from the village. Lady Adriana has suffered an accident." "I'm not injured," Adriana protested, though her legs trembled and her hands still shook. Nevertheless, he guided her toward the entrance with a hand at her elbow, the only courtesy he seemed willing to offer. "You've had a shock. You'll see the doctor." The great hall swallowed them in warmth and candlelight. Adriana had a confused impression of portraits lining the walls, of carved wood and ancient tapestries, before an older woman in a housekeeper's black dress bustled forward. "Your Grace, we weren't expecting—" The woman stopped, taking in Adriana's sodden dress and borrowed coat. "Oh, my stars. Mrs. Hawthorne, this is Lady Adriana Fairfax. Her carriage went over the cliffs near Raven's Point. She'll require a room, dry clothes, and hot tea." If the name Fairfax meant anything to the housekeeper, she hid it well. "Of course, Your Grace. This way, my lady." But as Mrs. Hawthorne led her toward the stairs, Adriana heard another voice from the shadows of the hall. "Fairfax, Salvador, you cannot mean to—" "Not now, Edmund." Adriana glanced back to see a younger man emerging from a side room, his face a softer version of the Duke's harsh features. His eyes found hers across the distance, widening with something between recognition and alarm. "Get her settled," the Duke told Mrs. Hawthorne, his voice harder now. "Then send word to my study. I'll want a full account of the accident." "Accident," the younger man, Edmund, repeated softly. "Is that what we're calling it?" The Duke's jaw tightened. "Edmund, of course. Forgive me." But Edmund's gaze remained fixed on Adriana as she climbed the stairs, and the expression in his eyes made her skin prickle with unease. Mrs. Hawthorne led her down a corridor lined with more portraits. Ashbournes, all of them, centuries of grey eyes and strong features staring down at the interloper in their midst. The room she was shown to was surprisingly comfortable. A four-poster bed with heavy curtains, a fire already crackling in the grate, and windows that looked out over the storm-dark sea. "I'll have hot water sent up," Mrs. Hawthorne said kindly, "and something warm to wear while your dress dries. You've had quite an ordeal, poor dear." "Mrs. Hawthorne," Adriana said as the woman turned to leave. "The Duke, does he often ride the cliff roads during storms?" The housekeeper's expression softened. "His Grace rides every evening, rain or shine, has done since his brother passed 3 years ago. Says it clears his mind." She paused at the door. Providence that he was there tonight, wasn't it? After she'd gone, Adriana moved to the window and stared out at the cliffs. Providence. Was that what had brought the Duke to that exact spot at that exact moment? Or had her mother's letter been right, that their fates had always been entwined, waiting only for the right moment to collide? She pulled the letter from her bodice, its ink blurred now from seawater and rain, but still legible. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you must flee. Seek Ravenshire. The truth of your inheritance lies there, and the danger that comes with it. Trust no one, not even the Duke, especially not the Duke. But know this, the Ashbournes and Fairfaxes were once united. What was broken can be mended if you survive long enough to see it done." Adriana pressed her forehead against the cold glass, her carriage driver's nervous hands. The sword axle she'd glimpsed before the wood gave way completely. The Duke's perfectly timed arrival. Nothing about tonight had been providence. Everything had been design. The only question was whose. Adriana woke to pale morning light, filtering through unfamiliar curtains and the distant cry of gulls. For one disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was then. Memory crashed over her like the waves that had nearly claimed her life. The carriage, the fall, the Duke's hand pulling her from death. She sat up slowly, her muscles protesting. Someone had left a tray of tea and bread on the bedside table, now cold. The dress draped over the chair was simple but well made, charcoal grey with black trim mourning colours, she realised. Borrowed from some woman of this house who'd suffered loss, given the Duke's mention of his brother, perhaps borrowed from him. She dressed quickly, braiding her hair without benefit of a lady's maid, and ventured into the corridor. In daylight, Ravenshire Hall felt less like a fortress and more like a mausoleum. The portraits she'd glimpsed last night lined every wall, generations of Ashbournes watching her progress with painted eyes. She found herself searching their faces for traces of Salvador, the strong jaw, the penetrating gaze, the hint of darkness that seemed bred into their bones. Voices drifted from below. She followed them down the grand staircase, her hand trailing along the polished banister, until she reached the entrance to what appeared to be a breakfast room. The Duke stood by the window, his back to the door, while Edmund sat at the table with a newspaper and a plate of kippers. Both men looked up as she entered. Lady Adriana. The Duke's greeting was formal, his expression shuttered in morning light. Clean-shaven and dressed in severe black, he looked every inch the aristocrat she'd expected before meeting the storm-soaked rescuer on the cliffs. "I trust you slept well as could be expected, Your Grace." She remained in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "I apologize for intruding on your breakfast. Mrs. Hawthorne said I should come down, but perhaps you must eat." He gestured to the sideboard laden with covered dishes. "Please, you're a guest in this house, however unexpected your arrival." The words were courteous, but his tone suggested she was less guest and more problem requiring management. Edmund rose, offering a slight bow. "We haven't been properly introduced. Edmund Ashbourne, the Duke's cousin, and may I say, Lady Adriana, you look remarkably well for someone who plunged off a cliff last evening." "Edmund," the Duke warned. "What? I'm merely observing that Lady Adriana possesses admirable fortitude." Edmund's smile was charming, but his eyes held the same wariness she'd seen last night. "Tell me, do you make a habit of such dramatic entrances, or is this a particular talent you reserve for Ravenshire?" "I assure you, Mr. Ashbourne, I would have preferred a less eventful arrival, and yet arrive you did." He returned to his seat, taking up his newspaper with studied casualness. "One might almost think fate determined you should meet my cousin, regardless of the cost." "That's enough." The Duke's voice cracked like a whip. "Lady Adriana is here because her carriage failed and I happened upon the scene. Nothing more." "Of course." Edmund's tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. "Pure coincidence that after 20 years of silence, a Fairfax should appear on our doorstep." Adriana's appetite vanished. 20 years. The Duke's expression darkened. "My cousin speaks out of turn. Do I? I think Lady Adriana deserves to know what she's walked into, or fallen into, as the case may be." Edmund set down his paper. "Tell me, my lady, what do you know of the history between our families?" "Edmund, I will not warn you again." "Very little," Adriana admitted, ignoring the Duke's fury. "My guardians never spoke of the Ashbournes, but my mother, before she died, she left me a letter. She said the truth of my inheritance lay at Ravenshire." The silence that followed was absolute. Edmund broke it with a low whistle. "Well, that's illuminating." The Duke turned to face her fully, and the intensity of his gaze made her step back. "Your mother sent you here? When did she die?" 3 months ago. "And your guardians, where are they now?" "In London. I left without their knowledge." She lifted her chin. "They've controlled my inheritance since my father's death. I recently discovered they've been lying to me about its extent and its location." "Let me guess," Edmund said softly. "The estates border Ravenshire lands." Adriana's breath caught. "How did you know?" The Duke and his cousin exchanged a look, weighted with meaning. "Because," the Duke said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "those estates have been in litigation for 23 years, since before you were born." He moved toward her with predatory grace. "They currently belong to the Montcalm family, who won their claim after your grandfather died intestate, or so the courts ruled." "That's impossible. My grandfather had an heir. My father was declared illegitimate. The marriage between your grandparents was annulled posthumously." The room tilted. Adriana gripped the doorframe. "No, that's a lie." "Is it?" The Duke stopped an arm's length away. "Tell me, Lady Adriana, what exactly did your mother's letter say? Because if she sent you here seeking proof of your legitimacy, she sent you into the heart of a battle that's already been lost." "She said the Ashbournes and Fairfaxes were once united." The words came out as barely a whisper. "That what was broken could be mended." Edmund stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Salvador, you cannot possibly be considering—" "I'm considering nothing except Lady Adriana's safety." The Duke's eyes never left hers. "Because if your carriage was sabotaged, and if the Montcalms learn you've survived and come here seeking your inheritance, they will kill you to ensure their claim remains secure. Then I should leave. I won't bring danger to your house." "Too late." His voice was almost gentle. "You're already here, already connected to me by last night's rescue. If they want you dead, leaving now only makes you an easier target. So what do you suggest?" The Duke's jaw tightened. "That you stay at Ravenshire Hall under my protection until we determine who tried to murder you and what your mother knew that made them desperate enough to do it." The Duke's steward arrived before noon, his weathered face grim beneath a dripping hat. Adriana watched from the library window as Salvador strode across the courtyard to meet him, Edmund trailing behind. Even from this distance, she could read tension in the set of the Duke's shoulders. She shouldn't be here, shouldn't be drawing these dangerous men into whatever conspiracy had killed her mother and nearly killed her. But Salvador's words echoed in her mind. Leaving now only makes you an easier target. The library door opened. Mrs. Hawthorne entered bearing tea, and what might have been sympathy in her weathered features. Thought you might need something warm, my lady. You've had quite a shock, learning about all that old business. You know about the dispute between our families? Everyone in these parts knows, dear. The lawsuit dragged on for years before the courts finally ruled. She set down the tray with careful precision, though I'll say this, your grandfather was a good man. Always seemed strange to me, those claims about the marriage being false. You knew him? Before my time at the Hall, I worked at Fairfax Manor. Lovely estate it was, before the Montcalms took possession. Her expression darkened. They let it fall to ruin. They did. Almost like they wanted to erase every trace of your family. Adriana's throat tightened. And my father? Gone before the worst of it. Died young, God rest him. Your mother fought the annulment claims, but without your father there to testify. She trailed off, then patted Adriana's hand. Drink your tea, dear. His Grace will get to the bottom of this. After the housekeeper left, Adriana stood at the window, nursing her tea and watching the sea. The storm had passed, leaving the cliffs washed clean and dangerous in afternoon light. Somewhere down there, her carriage lay broken among the rocks, and with it, whatever evidence might have proven the accident was murder. The door burst open. Salvador entered, his face carved from stone, Edmund behind him. We need to talk. Now. She set down her cup. What did your steward find? Tell her, Edmund said quietly. The Duke's hands flexed at his sides. The axle was sawed 3/4 through, clean cuts, deliberately weakened to fail under stress. Your driver knew the cliff road would finish the job. The room spun. Adriana gripped the windowsill. The driver, where is he? Dead. Pulled from the wreckage this morning. Convenient, wouldn't you say? Salvador's voice was hard as the stone walls around them. No witnesses, no one to testify about who hired him or paid him to take that route. Someone wanted it to look like an accident, Edmund added. A tragic mishap on a storm-dark road. Another young lady lost to the treacherous Dorset cliffs. But why? Adriana's voice cracked. I'm no threat to anyone. I have no proof of my legitimacy, no documents. Don't you? Salvador moved toward her with predatory focus. Your mother's letter, what else did it say? Every word, Lady Adriana. This is no time for secrets. She pulled the ruined letter from her pocket, handing it to him with trembling fingers. He read it quickly, then passed it to Edmund. Trust no one, not even the Duke, especially not the Duke. Edmund looked up, one eyebrow raised. Harsh words. Cousin. She had reason. Salvador's expression was unreadable. Our fathers were enemies by the end. If Lady Adriana's mother believed I was involved in the conspiracy to steal her daughter's inheritance, but you weren't, Adriana said. It wasn't a question. No, I was 14 when the courts ruled. My father handled the matter. Something flickered in his eyes. Though I'll admit, the Ashbournes profited from your family's downfall. The Montcalms purchased Fairfax Manor using loans from our bank. We hold the mortgages still. The revelation hit like a physical blow. So you do have a stake in keeping my claim buried. Had, he corrected sharply. Past tense. Those loans were my father's doing, and I've spent 3 years trying to untangle his less savory business arrangements. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. But you're right to be suspicious. Everyone in this mess has something to gain from your death, including me. Salvador, Edmund warned. She deserves honesty. The Duke's grey eyes locked with hers. If your claim is legitimate, the Montcalms lose everything. If they default on their loans, Ravenshire's bank suffers. If the annulment is proven false, it calls into question other rulings my father influenced. He paused. It could destroy us both. Then why protect me? Because whatever my father did, I won't compound his sins with murder. His voice was fierce now. And because your mother was right, our families were once united. Before the greed and lies and legal warfare, before your grandfather died and mine grew corrupt, the Ashbournes and Fairfaxes were allies. More than allies, Edmund said quietly. Salvador's great-grandmother was a Fairfax. We share blood, distant though it may be. Adriana stared at the two men. My mother knew this? Almost certainly. Salvador returned to the desk, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. I've been through my father's papers since his death. There are references to documents, original marriage certificates, baptismal records that he claimed were destroyed in a fire at Fairfax Manor. Claimed. The timing was convenient. The fire occurred 3 days before the annulment hearing. He opened the ledger, pointing to an entry. And my father made a substantial payment to the Montcalm solicitor the same week. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Your father helped them forge the case. Yes. The word was clipped, bitter. And now someone is willing to kill to keep that fraud buried. The question is, who sent the assassin? The Montcalms have the most obvious motive, but they're not the only ones who'd suffer if the truth came out. Edmund leaned against the desk. The solicitor who handled the case, the judges who ruled, anyone who profited from the estate sales. We're talking about dozens of people with reasons to want Lady Adriana silenced. Then how do we find out which one tried to kill me? Adriana demanded. Salvador's smile was cold and dangerous. We make them think they succeeded. What? You're officially dead, Lady Adriana, lost to the sea in a tragic accident. We'll put word out quietly, let it spread through the usual channels. He closed the ledger with finality, and while your murderer celebrates, we'll use the time to find your mother's proof and expose everyone who conspired to steal your inheritance. And if we fail, his eyes met hers, unflinching, then you stay dead, assume a new name, and disappear forever. Because if we move openly and fail, they won't stop with another convenient accident. They'll make certain you're buried where no one will ever find you. The weight of it settled over her like a shroud. Her life, her name, her future all hanging on the word of a man her mother had warned her not to trust. But what choice did she have? How long? She asked. As long as it takes. Salvador's voice softened slightly. You'll remain here, hidden, a ghost in Ravenshire Hall. Can you bear it? Adriana thought of her mother's letter, of the driver's nervous hands, of the moment her fingers slipped on rain-slick stone. I can bear anything if it means finding the truth. Then we begin tonight. The Duke turned to his cousin. Edmund, send word to our sources in London. I want to know who's been asking about Lady Adriana, who knew her travel plans, who stands to gain from her death. And the Montcalms? Watch them, carefully. But don't let them know we suspect anything. As Edmund left to carry out his orders, Salvador moved to the window beside Adriana, both of them staring out at the cliffs where she'd nearly died. Your mother was wise to warn you against me, he said quietly. The Ashbournes have brought your family nothing but ruin. Perhaps, Adriana replied, or perhaps we have a chance to right those wrongs. He turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold control in his expression. Uncertainty, hope, maybe, or fear. I pray you're right, Lady Adriana, because if we fail, I won't be the only one damned by my father's sins. Then we won't fail. The words hung between them like a vow, fragile as trust, sharp as necessity, and binding as any oath sworn in blood. That evening, Adriana found herself alone in the library as twilight painted the sea purple and gold. Salvador had disappeared into his study hours ago with ledgers and correspondence, leaving her to navigate the strange reality of her new existence. She was a ghost now, dead to the world beyond these walls. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt oddly liberating. She'd pulled several books from the shelves, histories of Dorset, volumes on property law, anything that might shed light on the tangled web of inheritance and fraud. But her attention kept wandering to the portrait above the fireplace. 2 young men, painted perhaps 5 years ago. One was unmistakably Salvador, though younger and less severe. The other shared his features but wore them with easier grace, a man who smiled readily, who hadn't yet learned the weight of duty and grief. My brother, Alexander. She turned to find Salvador in the doorway, still dressed in the severe black he'd worn all day, but with his cravat loosened and exhaustion evident in the lines around his eyes. He looks happy, Adriana said softly. He was. Salvador entered, moving to the sideboard where crystal decanters caught the fading light. He poured amber liquid into 2 glasses, offering her one. Alexander had a gift for happiness. It came naturally to him in ways it never did to me. She accepted the glass, their fingers brushing briefly. How did he die? A riding accident, or so we thought. He drank deeply, staring up at the portrait. He was thrown from his horse on the same stretch of cliff road where I found you. Broke his neck. The horse returned to the stables with blood on the saddle and terror in its eyes. Adriana's breath caught. "You don't believe it was an accident?" "I didn't at first. I was certain raving to anyone who'd listen about murder and conspiracy." His laugh was bitter, but there was no evidence. No tampering with the tack, no witnesses, nothing but my grief and paranoia. Eventually, even Edmund convinced me to accept it as tragedy rather than design. But now you arrive, and your carriage axle is deliberately sawed, and I find myself wondering if my paranoia wasn't paranoia at all. He turned to face her fully. Alexander was investigating our father's business dealings, the loans to the Montcalms, the suspicious timing of the fire, all of it. He believed our father had been complicit in fraud. Did he find proof? If he did, it died with him. Salvador's hands tightened around his glass. I searched his rooms, his papers, every place he might have hidden documents. Nothing. Either he found nothing, or someone removed the evidence before I could locate it. Or he hid it somewhere. You wouldn't think to look. His grey eyes sharpened. What do you mean? My mother was terrified in her final months. She knew she was being watched, that her letters were intercepted. So she hid her final message to me in the only place my guardians would never search, sewn into the lining of her mourning dress. Adriana set down her glass. If your brother suspected betrayal within Ravenshire Hall, he wouldn't hide evidence in his own rooms. Salvador was silent for a long moment. Then, the family chapel. Alexander spent hours there in the weeks before his death, said he was praying, seeking guidance. He met her eyes. I never thought to search it. A chapel seemed too sacred, too obvious, or perfectly hidden precisely because it's obvious. We'll search it tomorrow, in daylight. He moved to the window, his posture rigid. You should know I've sent word to London that a young woman matching your description perished in a carriage accident near Ravenshire. By tomorrow evening, half of society will be mourning the tragic loss of Lady Adriana Fairfax. The finality of it struck her, and if my guardians inquire, let them. They'll find witness testimony from my steward, a body pulled from the sea too damaged to identify, but wearing your dress, a burial in the village churchyard. His reflection in the dark glass was ghostly. You wanted to disappear from their control. Now you have. At the cost of my identity. Temporarily. When we expose the conspiracy, you'll be resurrected triumphant and legitimate. He paused. If we expose it. Adriana joined him at the window. Below, the cliffs fell away to darkness and the eternal thunder of waves. Tell me about your father, not the corrupt man who took bribes, but the man you knew before. Why? Because you're not him. I see that now. But you carry his sins as if they were your own. Salvador's jaw worked. He wasn't always corrupt. Once, he was principled, just everything a duke should be. But after my mother died, something broke in him. He grew obsessed with preserving Ravenshire's power, its wealth, its position. Nothing else mattered. Not even his sons? He loved us in his way, but love came second to legacy. He drained his glass. Alexander understood that. I never could. Perhaps that's why he was investigating, because he knew our father had sacrificed honor for expediency, and he couldn't bear it. And now you're trying to restore what your father destroyed. I'm trying to ensure his corruption doesn't destroy anyone else. Salvador's voice was raw. I've spent 3 years dismantling his worst schemes, returning seized properties where I could, compensating families he'd ruined. But the Fairfax matter that was too entangled, too public, the courts had ruled. To challenge it would have required proof I didn't have. Until I arrived with my mother's letter, until you nearly died on the same cliffs that killed my brother. He turned to her, and the anguish in his expression was startling. Do you understand what that means? If they killed Alexander for investigating, if they're willing to murder you to keep their secrets buried, then every moment you remain here puts you in danger. I'm already in danger. At least here, I have an ally whose family destroyed yours, an ally who pulled me from certain death. She reached out, hesitating only briefly before touching his arm. I know what my mother's letter said, but she also said the Ashbournes and Fairfaxes were once united. Perhaps she meant we could be again. Salvador stared down at her hand on his sleeve, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful control he maintained. You're far too trusting for someone who survived an assassination attempt, and you're far too honorable for someone descended from a corrupt duke. Am I? His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Because standing here with you, knowing what my father did to your family, I feel anything but honorable. What do you feel? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. In the growing darkness, with only the firelight casting shadows across his face, Salvador looked younger, less like the severe Duke of Ravenshire, and more like a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't quite lay to rest. Responsible, he said finally, determined. And he stopped himself. And hopeful. The admission seemed dragged from somewhere deep. For the first time since Alexander died, I feel as though there might be a path toward redemption. Not just for my father's sins, but for all the hatred and greed that's poisoned our families for a generation. Adriana's throat tightened. Then we take that path together. As allies. As... She hesitated over the word that wanted to follow. As family, Salvador finished quietly, however distant the connection. Yes, as family. He covered her hand with his own, the touch brief but deliberate. Then tomorrow, we search the chapel, and we find whatever Alexander died protecting, and if it's not there, then we keep searching until we unearth every secret, every lie, every corrupted soul who profited from your family's ruin. His grip tightened slightly. I swear it, Lady Adriana. On my brother's memory and my family's honor, what remains of it, I will see you restored to your rightful place. Even if it costs you everything? Salvador's smile was fierce and sad at once, especially then, because some debts can only be paid with everything we have. Later, alone in her borrowed room, Adriana stood at the window and watched the lighthouse beacon sweep across the dark water. Somewhere out there, people believed she was dead, her guardians, perhaps celebrating their continued control of her fortune. The Montcalms, breathing easier knowing their fraud remained buried. The mysterious conspirators who'd ordered her death, congratulating themselves on a murder well executed. Let them celebrate. Let them grow careless with relief. Because tomorrow, she and Salvador would begin unraveling the threads that bound their families in blood and betrayal. And when the truth finally emerged, it would sweep away every lie like the tide claiming the cliffs inevitable, inexorable, and utterly without mercy. Dawn broke cold and grey over Ravenshire, the kind of morning that made the sea look like hammered pewter. Adriana, dressed in the borrowed morning gown, braided her hair simply, and made her way downstairs before the household fully stirred. She found Salvador already waiting in the entrance hall, dressed for riding, his expression grim with purpose. "You didn't sleep," she observed. "Neither did you." He handed her a heavy cloak. "The chapel is a quarter-mile along the cliff path. We should go now, while the servants are occupied with morning duties." They slipped out through a side door, crossing the wind-swept grounds in silence. The family chapel rose ahead, small and ancient, built of the same grey stone as the hall, but weathered by centuries of coastal storms. Ivy climbed its walls, and the wooden door groaned as Salvador pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and still, heavy with the scent of old wood and stone. Morning light filtered through narrow windows, illuminating rows of simple pews, an altar draped in faded velvet, and along the walls, memorial tablets bearing generations of Ashbourne names. "Alexander's is there." Salvador pointed to a newer marble plaque. "I had it placed beside our mother's." Adriana read the inscription, "Alexander James Ashbourne, beloved brother and son, taken too soon from those who cherished him." Below the dates, a single line, "He sought the truth." "You wrote that," she said softly. "Edmund thought it unwise, said it would raise questions." Salvador's voice was tight. "But Alexander deserved that much. He died seeking truth, even if I couldn't prove it." "Then let's prove it now." Adriana turned, surveying the chapel. Where would he hide something? Not in plain sight, but somewhere meaningful. They searched methodically. Salvador examined the altar and pulpit, while Adriana investigated the pews and memorial tablets. Nothing. The chapel yielded no secrets, no hidden compartments, no cleverly concealed evidence. "Perhaps I was wrong," Salvador said after an hour, frustration evident. "Perhaps there's nothing here." Adriana sat in the front pew, studying Alexander's memorial. He sought the truth. The words nagged at her. Why phrase it that way? Not, he loved truth or he was honest, but sought, as if the seeking itself was what mattered. "Your brother was clever," she said slowly. "If he suspected someone in Ravenshire Hall, he wouldn't just hide evidence. He'd hide it in a way that only someone who truly understood him could find. I understood him better than anyone. Then think like him. Not like a duke trying to protect the family legacy, but like a younger brother who loved the truth more than comfort." She stood, moving to the memorial. What did Alexander love? What places? What objects? What memories? Salvador closed his eyes. Our mother. He spent hours here after she died, talking to her memorial. He was only 12, and he refused to accept she was gone. His eyes opened. He used to. He stopped, striding to his mother's memorial tablet. His fingers traced the carved letters of her name. Catherine Margaret Ashbourne, née Fairfax. Fairfax, Adriana breathed. My great-grandmother's line. Alexander was fascinated by the connection, by the fact that Ashbourne and Fairfax blood ran together in our veins. Salvador's fingers found the edge of the tablet, pressing. He said it meant our families were bound by more than law or property, that we were. The tablet shifted. Salvador pressed harder, and the entire memorial stone pivoted inward with a grinding of old mechanisms, revealing a hollow space behind it. Inside lay a leather document case, its surface dulled with age, but its contents protected from damp. They stared at it for a breathless moment. He hid it behind our mother's name, Salvador whispered, behind the Fairfax connection. Adriana reached in with trembling hands and withdrew the case. It was heavier than expected, stuffed with papers. She carried it to the altar where light was better, Salvador close behind her. Inside, documents. Dozens of them. Marriage certificates, the original joining Adriana's grandparents, complete with church seals and witness signatures. Birth records for her father, proving his legitimacy. Letters between Salvador's father and the Montcalm solicitor, detailing the conspiracy in damning clarity. Financial records showing payments made to judges, to witnesses, to clerks who'd lost crucial documents. And at the bottom, a letter in Alexander's handwriting. Salvador read it aloud, his voice rough with emotion. If you found this, brother, then I am likely dead, and my death was no accident. Our father was complicit in destroying the Fairfax family. I have documented everything, the bribes, the forged testimony, the deliberately set fire that destroyed the original marriage records at Fairfax Manor. I planned to bring this to the courts, but I know now that someone in our household reports to the Montcalms. I've been followed, my correspondence intercepted. They know I'm investigating. Salvador, you must understand the corruption goes deeper than our father. Lord Montcalm has connections in Parliament, in the judiciary, in places we cannot easily reach. Exposing this will bring scandal upon Ravenshire, but it is the right thing to do. I know you'll want to protect the family name, but some things matter more than reputation. The Fairfaxes were destroyed so that lesser men could profit. Their last surviving heir, should there be one, deserves justice. Do not mourn me if I fall. Finish what I started. Restore what was stolen. Your brother, Alexander. The silence that followed was absolute. Adriana's vision blurred with tears. He knew they would kill him, and he kept investigating anyway. Salvador's hands shook as he set down the letter. My brother died for your family's justice. While I buried him and mourned and convinced myself it was just cruel fate, he'd already given his life to expose the truth. This is enough. Adriana gestured at the documents. This proves everything, my legitimacy, the conspiracy, all of it. We can take this to the courts, to Parliament, and be dead within a fortnight. Salvador's voice was sharp. Alexander was right about the corruption extending beyond our father. Lord Montcalm has powerful allies. If we move openly with this evidence, they'll destroy it and us before we can make it public. Then what do we do? He gathered the documents carefully, returning them to the case. We use what Alexander died to give us. But carefully, strategically, we identify every conspirator, every corrupt official, every person with blood on their hands. Then we strike all at once, with evidence they cannot suppress and allies they cannot silence. That could take weeks, months. Then we have months. He met her eyes. I won't let my brother's death be meaningless, and I won't let his killers murder you the way they murdered him. They returned to the hall by a different route, avoiding the main paths. Mrs. Hawthorne met them in the corridor, her face pale. Your Grace, you have a visitor. Lord Montcalm. He's waiting in the drawing room. Salvador's expression went flat. Did he say what he wanted? To pay his respects, Your Grace. He heard about the tragic accident and came to offer condolences. Adriana's blood ran cold. He knows I'm dead. He thinks you're dead, Salvador corrected, which means our deception worked. He's come to ensure I'm appropriately convinced of the tragedy. His hand found hers briefly. Go upstairs. Don't let anyone see you. I'll handle Montcalm. Be careful. Always. but his smile was cold and dangerous, though perhaps Lord Montcalm should be the one worried about carefulness. After all, he's sitting in the house of a man who now knows he murdered an innocent woman and a beloved brother. As Adriana slipped up the servants' stairs, she heard Salvador's footsteps echoing toward the drawing room. Calm, measured. The perfect Duke receiving an unwelcome but expected visitor. She didn't envy Lord Montcalm. Because Salvador Ashbourne was no longer just a duke bound by duty and honor. He was a man who'd found proof of his brother's murder, who held evidence of conspiracy in his hands, who had every reason to seek vengeance wrapped in justice. And men like that were far more dangerous than any assassin's blade. From the gallery above, Adriana watched through the carved balustrade as Salvador greeted Lord Montcalm. The visitor was a portly man in his 50s, well-dressed but soft around the edges, the kind of aristocrat whose power came from cunning rather than courage. "Your Grace," Montcalm's voice carried upward, "please accept my deepest condolences. Such a tragedy, and so close to your own estate. These cliffs have claimed too many lives." "Indeed." Salvador's tone was perfectly calibrated, cool, but not hostile. "Your visit is unexpected, my lord. I came as soon as I heard. The young lady who perished, Lady Adriana Fairfax, I understand you attempted to rescue her." "I did, unsuccessfully. How terrible for you, to witness such a thing." Montcalm settled into a chair uninvited. "I knew her guardians slightly. They'll be devastated, of course. The last of the Fairfax line, gone." Adriana's hands tightened on the railing. The casual way he spoke of her death, the satisfaction barely concealed beneath false sympathy, it made her skin crawl. "Was there something specific you required, Lord Montcalm?" Salvador remained standing, a deliberate discourtesy. "I have estate matters requiring attention." Of course. I merely wished to ensure no unpleasantness arose from this incident. Lady Adriana was traveling to this region, and given the old litigation between her family and mine, well, I wanted to make certain no one might misconstrue the timing." "Misconstrue how?" "Accidents near disputed properties can raise unfortunate questions." Montcalm's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you understand, Your Grace. Your own father faced such speculation after the fire at Fairfax Manor. Baseless, of course, but damaging nonetheless. The threat was delicate but clear. I know your father's secrets. Don't dig into mine." Salvador's expression never changed. "The carriage accident was thoroughly investigated by my steward. A tragic failure of equipment during a storm. Nothing more." "Excellent. I'll ensure that account reaches the appropriate ears in London." Montcalm rose. "One less thing for either of our families to worry about. The Fairfax matter can finally be laid to rest, quite literally." After he left, Adriana waited a full minute before descending. She found Salvador standing at the drawing-room window, his posture rigid with controlled fury. "He's celebrating," she said quietly. "He thinks he's won. The last Fairfax heir dead, all evidence destroyed in the carriage wreckage, the conspiracy safe for another generation." Salvador turned, and his eyes were cold as winter sea. "He has no idea we found Alexander's documents, or that I'm alive. We need to keep it that way. But Lady Adriana," he hesitated. "Montcalm's visit confirms he was behind the assassination attempt. No innocent man travels hours to verify a death with such careful attention to detail. Then we have our killer. One of them. But Alexander's letter mentioned someone in this household reporting to the Montcalmers. Until we identify that traitor, you're not safe even here." The words hung between them like a noose. Someone in Ravensshire Hall was a spy, someone Salvador trusted, someone with access to his correspondence and knowledge of his movements. Edmund appeared in the doorway. "He's gone, I take it." I watched from the east wing. "Smuggest bastard I've ever seen." "Edmund," Salvador said slowly, "who knew Lady Adriana survived? Aside from us?" "Mrs. Hawthorne, the steward, Dr. Morrison when he came to examine her." Edmund's expression sharpened. "You think one of them is Montcalm's informant?" "Someone told them about Alexander's investigation, someone close enough to know his movements before he died." "It can't be Mrs. Hawthorne. She's been with our family for 30 years. 30 years is long enough to cultivate loyalty or resentment." Salvador moved to his desk, pulling out paper and ink. "We need to test them. Carefully." Adriana understood immediately. "Feed each person different information. See which version reaches Montcalm." "Precisely." "Edmund, you'll let slip to the steward that I'm traveling to London next week on business." Lady Adriana, you'll mention to Mrs. Hawthorne that you're considering moving to the Dower House for more privacy. I'll tell Dr. Morrison during his next visit that I'm investigating the carriage manufacturer, and whichever lie reaches Montcalm reveals our traitor. Edmund finished. Clever. When do we start? Today. Now. Before. A crash echoed from the corridor. They rushed out to find a servant girl sprawled at the base of the stairs, a tea tray shattered around her, blood seeping from a gash on her temple. Mary! Mrs. Hawthorne was already there, kneeling beside the girl. Someone fetch Dr. Morrison. She's fallen. But as Salvador helped lift the girl, Adriana saw the slight discoloration around her lips, the way her breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. She didn't fall, Adriana said. She was poisoned. Salvador's head snapped up. How do you know? My mother's final illness. The doctors called it natural decline. But I saw these same symptoms. Someone poisoned her to silence her before she could reveal who was intercepting her letters. Mrs. Hawthorne's face went white. But who would? Mary's just a housemaid. What could she possibly? What was Mary carrying? Salvador demanded. The housekeeper looked at the shattered tea service. Morning tea for the East Wing guest room, the room where Adriana was staying. The realization hit them all simultaneously. The poison hadn't been meant for Mary. It had been meant for the guest everyone believed was safely hidden away. Someone knows she's alive, Edmund breathed. Salvador lifted Mary carefully. Get Dr. Morrison, now. As Mrs. Hawthorne hurried away, he looked at Adriana. Upstairs. Lock yourself in my study. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Salvador, now. The command left no room for argument. Adriana ran, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard Edmund calling for the servants, Salvador's voice sharp with orders. She reached the study, slammed the door, and turned the key with shaking hands. Someone in Ravenshaw Hall had just tried to kill her. Someone who knew she was alive, who had access to the household, who could poison tea meant for a guest room without arousing suspicion. The traitor wasn't just reporting to Montcalm. The traitor was actively trying to finish what the carriage accident had failed to accomplish. She moved to Salvador's desk, searching for something, anything she could use as a weapon. Her hand closed around a letter opener just as the door handle rattled. Lady Adriana? A man's voice. Unfamiliar. His Grace sent me to ensure your safety. She said nothing, gripping the letter opener tighter. My lady, please. The house is in chaos. Let me help you. Who are you? Graves, the Duke's valet. He's with the injured girl and sent me to stand guard. It sounded reasonable. But Adriana had learned to trust her instincts, and every instinct screamed danger. I'm fine alone, thank you. Silence. Then, as you wish, my lady. I'll wait out here. She heard footsteps retreat but couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the corridor. Minutes crawled past. The house had gone eerily quiet after the initial uproar. Too quiet. A shadow moved past the window, someone on the grounds below. Adriana peered out carefully and saw a figure in a dark cloak hurrying toward the cliffs. The same path she and Salvador had taken to the chapel that morning. Understanding struck like lightning. The poisoning was a diversion. While everyone rushed to help Mary, someone was using the chaos to search the chapel, to find and destroy the evidence before Salvador could use it. She couldn't let that happen. Adriana unlocked the study door silently, peering into the empty corridor. No sign of Graves or anyone else. She slipped out, taking the servants' stairs down and out through the kitchen entrance. The wind had picked up, bringing the taste of rain. She pulled her cloak tight and followed the cliff path, staying low, watching the dark figure ahead enter the chapel. She should wait for Salvador, should call for help. But by then, Alexander's evidence might be destroyed, and with it, any hope of justice. Adriana gripped the letter opener in her pocket and moved toward the chapel, toward confrontation, toward whatever waited in that ancient stone sanctuary where secrets had been hidden and now would be fought over. Behind her, Ravenshaw Hall stood dark against gathering clouds. Ahead, in the chapel, a traitor worked to bury truth forever. And between them, Adriana walked alone, hunted, determined, and ready to fight for the inheritance that had already cost so many lives. The chapel door stood ajar. Inside, candlelight flickered against the ancient stones, casting writhing shadows. Adriana pressed herself against the outer wall, listening. The sound of stone scraping against stone told her the intruder had found the hidden compartment behind Catherine Ashbourne's memorial. She had seconds to act. Adriana slipped through the door, letter opener raised. The cloaked figure stood at the altar, Alexander's document case open before them, papers scattered as they searched frantically. "Step away from those documents." The figure spun. In the candlelight, Adriana recognized the face beneath the hood, Dr. Morrison, the kindly physician who'd been called to examine her after the rescue, who'd visited Ravenshaw Hall regularly since Alexander's death, who'd been perfectly positioned to monitor Salvador's investigation and report back to the Montcalms. "Lady Adriana." His voice held no surprise, only grim resignation. "I'd hoped the tea would spare us this unpleasantness. You poisoned an innocent girl. Mary was meant to deliver that tea hours ago. Her tardiness saved her life and complicated mine considerably." He gathered the documents with practiced efficiency. "I warned Lord Montcalm that keeping you here was too risky, but he insisted we wait, observe, see what the Duke knew before eliminating you both. Salvador has nothing to do with this, doesn't he?" Morrison's smile was cold. "He found these documents. He knows everything now. Do you truly believe Montcalm will let either of you live with that knowledge?" Adriana's grip tightened on the letter opener. "Those documents prove my legitimacy, prove your conspiracy murdered my family and Alexander Ashbourne. They prove nothing if they never reach a courtroom." Morrison tucked the case under his arm. "I've been cleaning up Montcalm's mistakes for 20 years. Your grandfather's heart failure, the convenient fire at Fairfax Manor, even young Alexander's tragic riding accident, though that one troubled me, I'll admit. He was a good man. Then why did you kill him?" "Because good men who seek truth are the most dangerous kind." Morrison moved toward her, his expression almost apologetic. "I take no pleasure in this, Lady Adriana, but you forced my hand. If you'd simply stayed dead, we could have avoided." He lunged. Adriana sidestepped, slashing with the letter opener. The blade caught his arm, drawing blood, but Morrison was stronger and more desperate than she'd anticipated. His fist caught her temple, and the world spun. She stumbled backward toward the door just as rough hands seized her from behind. Two men, hired thugs by their appearance, pulled her arms behind her back. "Secure her," Morrison ordered, pressing his bleeding arm. "And search her. If she has any of the documents hidden, I have them all." Salvador's voice cut through the chapel like a blade. He stood in the doorway, Edmund beside him, both armed with pistols. Behind them, the Duke's steward and 3 stable hands blocked the entrance. Morrison's face went pale. "Release her," Salvador said quietly. The pistol in his hand never wavered. "Now." The thugs hesitated only a moment before dropping Adriana's arms and raising their hands. She stumbled forward, and Edmund caught her, steadying her. "You can't prove anything," Morrison said, but his voice shook. "I'm a respected physician. My word against a duke, his cousin, and multiple witnesses who just watched you confess to murder." Salvador's smile was razor-sharp. "I think the courts will find my word carries more weight than yours, particularly when supported by Alexander's documentation of every bribe you received, every poisoning you committed, every death you facilitated." "Alexander never," Morrison stopped, understanding too late that he'd been trapped. "Never what?" "Never documented your involvement specifically." Salvador stepped into the chapel, his presence filling the small space. "You just confirmed your guilt, Doctor. Everything else is merely evidence." Morrison's composure cracked. He grabbed for the document case, but Edmund was faster, snatching it away. The physician stood empty-handed, wild-eyed, cornered. "Montcalm will what? Protect you?" Salvador's laugh was bitter. "Men like Montcalm don't protect accomplices who fail, they eliminate them. You should know that better than anyone." The truth of it showed on Morrison's face. He was a loose end now, a liability who'd been caught red-handed. Whether Salvador hanged him or Montcalm silenced him, his life was over. "I want a deal," he said hoarsely. "Full testimony against Montcalm and everyone else involved. Names, dates, evidence, locations, everything. In exchange for transportation to the continent and enough gold to start over. You murdered my brother, and I'll give you everyone else who ordered it. The magistrates who were bribed, the solicitors who forged documents, the lords in Parliament who buried investigations." Morrison's desperation was palpable. "Montcalm isn't the only one. There are a dozen men whose fortunes rest on the Fairfax fraud, remaining hidden. I can give you all of them." Salvador studied him for a long moment. Adriana could see the war in his expression, the desire for vengeance against his brother's killer, fighting with the pragmatic need for testimony that could topple an entire conspiracy. "Salvador," she said softly. "Alexander wanted justice, not just revenge." His jaw tightened. "Then, bind him. Lock him in the wine cellar under guard. If he tries to escape, shoot him. If he tries to take his own life, prevent it. His testimony is worth more than his death for now." As the stable hands secured Morrison, the physician looked at Adriana. "You should know Montcalm has men watching the roads. He's not convinced you're truly dead. When I don't report back tonight, he'll know for certain." "Let him know," Salvador said coldly. "Let him panic and make mistakes. Lady Adriana is under my protection, and I'm done playing games with corrupt lords who think themselves above justice." They escorted Morrison back to the hall through gathering darkness. Adriana walked beside Salvador, her head still ringing from the blow she'd taken. "You followed me," she said. "The moment I realized you'd left the study, yes. Did you truly think I'd let you face danger alone?" His hand found hers briefly. "You're brave, Lady Adriana, but bravery without backup is simply foolishness. I thought they'd destroy the evidence before you could stop them, and I thought you'd wait for help before confronting a murderer." His grip tightened. "Don't do that again, please." The raw emotion in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the controlled Duke giving orders. This was a man who'd already lost his brother and couldn't bear to lose anyone else. "I promise," she said softly. At the hall, chaos still reigned. Mary was alive but unconscious, Dr. Morrison's antidote administered before he'd fled. Mrs. Hawthorne wept with relief. The servants whispered about betrayal and poison, their sense of safety shattered. Salvador gathered them all in the great hall. "You deserve the truth," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "Lady Adriana Fairfax is alive. Her death was a deception designed to expose those who tried to murder her. Doctor, Morrison has been arrested for poisoning, conspiracy, and the murder of my brother Alexander." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled staff. "There may be others in this household who report to our enemies. If you have information about suspicious activities, payments, or pressure to spy on this family, speak now. I promise clemency to anyone who comes forward voluntarily." Silence. Then from the back a trembling voice, "Your Grace." A young footman stepped forward. Lord Montcalm's man approached me last month, offered me gold to report on your correspondence. I refused, but I was afraid to say anything, afraid I'd be dismissed or worse." "You did nothing wrong," Salvador said firmly, "and your honesty now protects this household. Anyone else?" 2 more servants came forward with similar stories. Montcalm had cast a wide net, seeking informants. Most had refused, but the pressure had left them frightened and uncertain whom to trust. "From this moment," Salvador declared, "any approach from Montcalm's people is to be reported immediately. This house will not harbor traitors, but neither will it punish the innocent. We stand together, all of us, against those who would corrupt justice for profit." Later, in Salvador's study, Adriana finally allowed exhaustion to claim her. She sank into a chair while Edmund poured brandy, and Salvador examined Alexander's recovered documents. "Morrison's testimony will be devastating," Edmund observed. "If he truly gives us names—" "He will," Salvador said, "because he knows cooperation is his only chance at survival. And even that's slim." He looked up at Adriana. "You nearly died tonight. Again." "But I didn't. We didn't." She accepted the brandy Edmund offered. "We have the evidence, Morrison's testimony, and Montcalm knows we're coming for him now, which makes him desperate." Salvador set down the documents. "And desperate men do desperate things. He'll move against us with everything he has. Then we move first." Adriana's voice was steady despite her trembling hands. "We take this evidence to London, to Parliament, to the courts, to every honest man with power. We bury Montcalm and everyone who helped him before they can bury us." Salvador's smile was fierce and proud. "Tomorrow we ride for London, with Morrison under guard, every document Alexander died protecting, and an accounting that's 23 years overdue." "And what of me?" Adriana asked. "I'm supposed to be dead." "Then Lady Adriana Fairfax will stay dead a while longer." His eyes held hers. "But the woman who helps me destroy a conspiracy, she'll have a new name, new papers, and a place at my side as we see this through to the end. A dangerous place. The only place I want you to be." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that went far beyond conspiracy and justice. In the candlelight, Salvador looked less like a duke and more like a man who'd found something worth fighting for beyond duty. "Then we finish this together," Adriana said. "For Alexander, for my family, for all the lives destroyed by greed and lies." "Together," Salvador agreed, and as Edmund quietly left them alone, as the fire burned low and the night deepened, they began planning the campaign that would either restore their family's honor or destroy them both in the attempt. They left for London before dawn, the carriage heavily guarded with outriders and Salvador's most trusted men. Morrison travelled in chains in a separate wagon, his testimony too valuable to risk. Adriana wore a simple travelling dress and a veil, transformed into Miss Catherine Grey, Salvador's distant relation come to stay at his London townhouse. The journey took 2 days. Edmund rode ahead to arrange meetings with select members of Parliament, men Salvador trusted, men whose integrity couldn't be bought. By the time they reached London's outskirts, word had already spread through careful channels. The Duke of Ravenshire was bringing evidence of massive judicial corruption, but Montcalm had heard the whispers too. They were 3 miles from Salvador's townhouse when the attack came. Mounted men burst from the tree line, a dozen at least, faces covered, pistols drawn. The carriage lurched as the driver whipped the horses into a desperate gallop. Shots rang out. One outrider fell, another returned fire. "Get down!" Salvador shoved Adriana to the floor, his body shielding hers as bullets splintered the carriage walls. Through the chaos, she heard Edmund's voice shouting orders, the thunder of hooves, the crack of gunfire. The carriage swerved violently, throwing them both against the side. Then silence. Salvador lifted his head cautiously. "Stay here, like hell." She grabbed Alexander's document case, clutching it to her chest. "If they're after the evidence, they'll have to kill us both to get it." His eyes blazed with something between fury and admiration. "You're the most infuriating woman I've ever met, and you're the most overprotective duke in England. Now move." They emerged to find Edmund and the remaining guards in a standoff with the attackers. Bodies lay in the road, some of Salvador's men, some of the ambushers. The air reeked of gunpowder and blood. "Stand down," a voice called from behind the attackers. Lord Montcalm rode forward, his face flushed, his expensive coat spattered with mud. "It's over, Ravenshire. Hand over the documents and the girl, and I'll let you live. You're in no position to make demands." Salvador's pistol never wavered. "You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Surrender now, and I'll ensure you face trial rather than a rope in this very road." Montcalm laughed, but there was desperation in it. "Trial? Before judges I bought? Magistrates I own? You naive fool. This evidence means nothing. I'll have it suppressed, you discredited, and your precious Fairfax whore dead before sunset." Salvador's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't," Adriana said quietly, touching his arm. "He's not worth it, and we need him alive." "Listen to her, Duke." Montcalm's sneer was ugly. "She knows her place on her knees, begging for mercy she won't receive." "My place," Adriana said, stepping forward, "is standing on the grave of your conspiracy while you hang for murdering my family." She held up the document case. "These papers prove everything. Your fraud, your bribes, your murders. Alexander Ashbourne documented it all before you killed him." For the first time, true fear flickered across Montcalm's face. "And we're not bringing it to your purchased judges," Salvador added. "We're taking it directly to the Prince Regent himself. Edmund's arranged an audience for tomorrow morning. Unless you think you've bribed the heir to the throne?" Montcalm's composure shattered. "You're bluffing. The Regent won't see you." "Won't he?" Edmund urged his horse forward, a sealed letter in his hand bearing the royal crest. "His Royal Highness takes a dim view of corruption that embarrasses the crown, particularly when that corruption involves forged inheritance claims and murdered aristocrats." He smiled coldly. "I took the liberty of sending him a summary yesterday. He was quite interested." The standoff stretched. Montcalm looked at his men, calculating odds, weighing options. His hand moved toward his pistol. "Don't be a fool," Salvador said. "You're already facing the gallows. Don't add the murder of a duke to your crimes." "I'm dead either way," Montcalm's voice broke. "You've destroyed everything. My estates, my fortune, my name, all built on foundations you're about to demolish. What's one more murder when I've nothing left to lose?" He drew his pistol. Everything happened at once. Adriana threw herself sideways as Montcalm fired. The bullet meant for Salvador struck the carriage behind them. Edmund's men returned fire. Montcalm's horse reared, throwing him. Salvador tackled Adriana, rolling them both behind the carriage wheel as chaos erupted. Gunfire echoed. Men shouted. Horses screamed. When the smoke cleared, half of Montcalm's men were dead or wounded. The others had their hands raised in surrender. And Montcalm himself lay in the road, Edmund's pistol pressed to his temple. "Move and you die," Edmund said conversationally. "Though, honestly, I'd prefer you resist. Save us the trouble of a trial." Salvador helped Adriana to her feet, checking her for injuries with hands that shook slightly. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are you?" "Only my pride. I promised to keep you safe, and you nearly took a bullet because of my vendetta." "Our vendetta," she corrected. "And I'm fine. We're both fine." She looked at Montcalm, still pinned beneath Edmund. "It's over now." But Montcalm laughed wild, broken laughter. "Over? You think this ends with me? There are a dozen more like me, men whose fortunes depend on the Fairfax fraud staying buried. You've won this battle, but the war is already lost," a new voice said. They turned to see a line of official carriages approaching, led by a man in magistrate's robes. Behind him rode soldiers bearing the royal standard. "Lord Montcalm," the magistrate said formally, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, murder, and attempted murder of a peer. By order of His Royal Highness the Prince Regent, you and all co-conspirators named in the Duke of Ravenshire's testimony will face immediate trial before the High Court." Montcalm's face went grey. "This is impossible. You can't. The courts. The courts you corrupted have been suspended pending investigation." The magistrate's expression was granite. His Royal Highness takes a very personal interest in matters touching the integrity of English justice, particularly when noble families are destroyed through fraud. As soldiers hauled Montcalm away, still protesting, the magistrate approached Salvador. "Your Grace, His Royal Highness requests your presence tomorrow morning, along with Lady Adriana Fairfax. Yes, we know she lives, and all documentary evidence. He wishes to review the matter personally before trials commence." "We'll be there," Salvador said. After the officials departed with their prisoners, the three of them stood in the blood-spattered road, exhausted and shaking with reaction. "How?" Adriana asked Edmund. "How did you arrange all this so quickly?" "I didn't work quickly. I worked thoroughly." Edmund's smile was tired but triumphant. "I've been building this case for 3 years, since Alexander died, gathering evidence, cultivating allies, waiting for the right moment. When you arrived, Lady Adriana, you gave us the final piece we needed, proof that the conspiracy was still active and willing to kill. You used me as bait." "We used you as justice," Salvador corrected gently. "And you were magnificent." She looked at the document case still clutched in her hands. "Alexander's evidence, my mother's sacrifice, all the lives destroyed by Montcalm's greed. It can't be for nothing." "It won't be." Salvador took her hand. "Tomorrow we stand before the Regent. We present every document, every testimony, every piece of proof that the Fairfax family was destroyed through fraud. And we watch as the conspiracy that's poisoned 2 families for a generation finally burns. And after," his grey eyes held hers, "after Lady Adriana Fairfax reclaims her rightful inheritance, the courts restore her legitimacy, and she decides what future she wants, with or without a duke whose family helped destroy hers." The vulnerability in his voice made her throat tighten. "I think that depends." "On what?" "On whether that duke is asking out of duty or desire." Salvador's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "If it were duty, I'd have handed you to the courts and walked away. What I feel, what I've felt since I pulled you from those cliffs, is something far more dangerous than duty." "And what's that?" "Hope," he whispered. "Hope that 2 broken families can be mended, that sins can be atoned for, that a woman brave enough to fight for justice might also be brave enough to forgive the son of the man who tried to destroy her family." Adriana's answer was to close the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and promise, of endings and beginnings, of everything they'd fought for and everything they might still become. When they finally parted, Edmund was diplomatically checking the carriage wheel, whistling tunelessly. "Tomorrow," Adriana said, "we face the Regent." "Together," Salvador agreed. "And after?" His smile was real this time, warm and true. "After, we build something better than what our fathers left us. Together." As they climbed back into the damaged carriage and continued toward London, Adriana looked back once at the battlefield they were leaving behind. Blood and violence, yes, but also the end of decades of corruption. Tomorrow would bring testimony and trials, restoration and justice. But tonight, she rode beside a man who'd risked everything for truth. And for the first time since her mother's death, Adriana allowed herself to believe in futures that didn't end in tragedy. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Carlton House as Adriana stood before the Prince Regent, wearing a gown borrowed from Salvador's sister, deep blue silk, that transformed her from a ghost into a lady of consequence. Beside her, Salvador stood in formal court dress, and Edmund held the document case that had cost so many lives to protect. Lady Adriana Fairfax. The Regent's voice was surprisingly gentle for a man of his reputation. "We are pleased to see you alive, despite reports to the contrary. Your Royal Highness," she curtsied deeply. "I apologize for the deception. It was necessary to expose those who sought my death." "So," the Duke has explained. The Regent gestured to the documents spread before him: Alexander's evidence, Morrison's written testimony, financial records spanning 2 decades. "We have spent the night reviewing these materials. The corruption they reveal is extensive. It reaches into the highest levels of our judiciary, Your Highness," Salvador said. "Men we trusted to uphold justice were bought and paid for by Montcalm and his associates." "Yes," the Regent's expression darkened. "Which is why we are convening a special tribunal under our direct authority. Every judge, magistrate, and solicitor named in these documents will be investigated. Those found guilty will be removed from office and prosecuted." "And Lady Adriana's claim," Edmund asked quietly, "will be immediately restored by royal decree." The Regent stood, moving to the window overlooking the gardens. The annulment of her grandparents' marriage was fraudulent, obtained through perjured testimony and forged documents. Her father's legitimacy is hereby confirmed. All properties, titles, and income seized from the Fairfax estate will be returned to her within the month. Adriana's legs nearly gave way. Salvador's hand found hers, steadying her. "Your Highness is most generous," she managed. "We are most just," he corrected, "and we are most angry that English courts were corrupted to destroy a noble family for profit." He turned back to them. "But we must address another matter. Lord Montcalm faces execution for murder and treason. His estates will be forfeit to the Crown. However, the Ravenshire Bank holds mortgages on those properties." Salvador's jaw tightened. "I will forgive those debts, Your Highness. The loans were made under corrupt circumstances. I want no profit from Montcalm's fraud." A noble gesture, but unnecessary. The Regent's smile was thin. "We will purchase those mortgages from Ravenshire at full value. The Crown will then transfer the deeds to Lady Adriana as partial compensation for the injustice done to her family." Adriana stared. "Your Highness, I cannot. That would make me one of the wealthiest women in England. It would make you what you should have been all along, a properly endowed lady of quality with the means to live independently." His eyes held understanding. "We suspect you will have suitors aplenty once your restoration is known. It's only fair you have the resources to choose according to your heart rather than necessity." His gaze flickered meaningfully to Salvador. "Thank you, Your Highness," Adriana said softly. "Your justice honors my family's memory, and your courage honors England." The Regent returned to his desk. "There will be a formal ceremony next week to announce your restoration. Until then, you are to remain in London under the Duke of Ravenshire's protection. We trust, that is, acceptable?" "Most acceptable, Your Highness," Salvador said, his voice carefully neutral, though his hand tightened on Adriana's. After they were dismissed, the 3 of them stood in the columned hallway, almost afraid to believe it was truly over. "He gave you everything," Edmund said wonderingly. "Not just your inheritance. He made you wealthier than most peers in the realm." "He gave us justice," Adriana corrected. "Everything else is just compensation." "And a very pointed suggestion that you have options," Salvador added quietly. "The Regent made it clear you're free to choose your own future now. You owe me nothing. Not gratitude, not loyalty, certainly not." He stopped. "Not love?" she finished. He looked away. "Your mother warned you against trusting the Ashbournes. She had good reason. My father helped destroy your family. His sins stain me, even if I opposed them. Your father's sins are not yours." Adriana took his hand properly now, not caring who might see. "And my mother also wrote that the Ashbournes and Fairfaxes were meant to be united. Perhaps she knew what we'd find at the end of this, not just justice, but something worth building a future on." "You could have anyone now," he said roughly. Any lord in England would court you. You need not settle for damaged goods." "Damaged?" she laughed. "You're the Duke of Ravenshire. You risked everything to help me. You've spent 3 years atoning for your father's corruption. You're brilliant, honorable, infuriating, and the man who saved my life twice. If that's damaged, I'll take it over perfection any day." Edmund cleared his throat. "I should go check on the carriage, or the weather, or literally anything that isn't this conversation." He fled with undignified haste. Salvador pulled her into an alcove, away from curious eyes. "I'm asking this once, properly. No danger, no conspiracy, no desperate circumstances forcing you to rely on me." His hands framed her face. "Adriana Fairfax, would you consider in time, when you've had space to think clearly, allowing me to court you? Not out of debt or duty, but because I cannot imagine facing the future without you in it." "In time?" She raised an eyebrow. "After everything we've been through, you want to wait for some arbitrary period of propriety? I want to do this right. Court you properly. Let you see what life with me would truly be like. Give you every chance to change your—" She kissed him, cutting off the noble speech. When she pulled back, his eyes were storm-dark and heated. "I've already seen what life with you is like," she said. "You're stubborn, overprotective, and entirely too concerned with doing things properly. But you're also brave, just, and the only man I've ever met who'd risk his title to restore mine. So no, Salvador Ashbourne, I will not let you court me properly for some extended period, while I think clearly." His expression fell. "I'll marry you instead," she continued, "immediately, scandalously, and with absolutely no concern for propriety. Because life's too short to waste on courtship rituals when I already know exactly what I want." For a long moment, he simply stared. Then his laugh broke free, real, joyful, transforming his entire face. "You're absolutely impossible. I learned from the best. Do you accept?" "On one condition." His arms wrapped around her waist. "We marry in Ravenshire Chapel, where Alexander's evidence was hidden, where our family's secret history waited to be discovered, where everything changed, where 2 broken families began to heal," she agreed. "Yes, I accept your condition. Then we're engaged." Scandalously quickly, "Society will talk. Let them," she grinned. "We've survived assassination attempts and conspiracies. We can survive gossip." That evening, at Salvador's London townhouse, they gathered in his study, the same 3 who'd begun this journey together. Edmund poured champagne while Salvador formally announced their engagement. "To impossible women and the fools who love them," Edmund toasted. "To brothers who die seeking truth and the justice that honors their sacrifice," Salvador added, his voice catching slightly. "To families broken and mended," Adriana finished. "To futures built on something better than our fathers left us." They drank, and in the comfortable silence that followed, Adriana felt the weight of the past weeks finally lift. Montcalm awaited trial. The conspiracy was broken, her inheritance was restored, and the man who'd pulled her from the cliffs now held her heart as surely as he'd held her wrist that storm-dark night. "What will you do with Fairfax Manor?" Edmund asked. "Once it's returned to you." "Restore it," she said immediately. "My mother's memory deserves better than ruin. And," she glanced at Salvador, "perhaps our children will need 2 estates, one for the Ravenshire legacy, one for the Fairfax name." "Children?" Salvador's eyes gleamed. "You're planning already?" "Someone has to. You're too busy being noble and proper." "Not anymore." He pulled her close, uncaring that Edmund was still in the room. "From now on, I'm simply going to be impossibly, scandalously in love with my wife. Propriety be damned." "Finally," Edmund muttered. "I thought you'd never stop being a martyr about father's sins." 3 weeks later, they married in Ravenshire Chapel, on a bright morning that made the sea sparkle like scattered diamonds. Adriana wore her mother's pearls and carried white roses from the Ravenshire gardens. Salvador wore Alexander's pocket watch, a reminder that justice had been won not for the living alone, but for all who'd suffered in the conspiracy's shadow. As they spoke their vows, where Alexander's evidence had been hidden, where secrets had been buried and truths revealed, Adriana thought of all the lives entwined in this moment. Her mother, who'd hidden clues in letters and dresses; Alexander, who'd documented corruption at the cost of his life; Salvador's father, whose sins had been atoned for by a son determined to be better; and Montcalm, awaiting execution for murders that would never be forgotten. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the vicar said. Salvador kissed her as church bells rang, as Edmund cheered, as Mrs. Hawthorne wept happily, as the Ravenshire servants who'd become her friends threw flower petals. Later, at the wedding breakfast, Edmund raised a final toast. To the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire. May they build something worthy of the sacrifices that brought them together. May they honor the dead by living fully, and may they never, ever let me get involved in another conspiracy as complicated as this one. Here, Salvador agreed, pulling Adriana close. As the celebration continued around them, Adriana looked out at the cliffs where she'd nearly died, where everything had begun. The lighthouse beam swept the darkness as it always had, guiding ships safely home. She'd come to Ravenshire seeking answers and found justice. She'd expected enemies and found allies. She'd been warned against the Duke and instead fallen in love with a man whose honor matched her courage. Two families, once broken by greed and lies, were now united by something stronger: truth, sacrifice, and love forged in fire. The ravens had risen again, and this time they would never fall.